Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, September the 12th, 2025, and today we're talking about how to use the weeds around the property and can you compost materials right where you plan to plant. A lot of compost stuff this week, which works for me, and it's Feedback Friday, so let's garage rock our way into the show today. Let's do it.
Hey nerds, it's all we have is now. Today, let's talk about rock and roll.
Okay, love it. That was the band All We Have Is Now, which you can find more of their work at allwehaveisnowband.com. Bandcamp and the other streaming services as well. We will link it in the show notes. Keep your theme songs coming all September to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Also keep those 20-second farm videos coming too. Those have been really awesome this week. Thank you all. All right, happy Friday, everyone. I hope everyone has had a nice, productive week and you're feeling good about it. I had a so-so week productivity-wise, but I'm feeling good about having got some winter kill cover crops in the ground and having got them well watered in as well using that Sumi soaker that Diego Fodor sent me. I know there's probably a limit on how much you can drag that stuff around the farm, but I wanted to try it in several different scenarios. And so far, so good. That one was on a little bit of a slope, so good to see that it works well there too. Also been cleaning up the Milpa-inspired patch and getting ready to get some cover crops in there. More on that perhaps next week. Anyway, for now, it is Friday, which means Feedback Friday, where we explore what you all were saying about this week's topics. On Monday, we talked about starting a sliding scale CSA in a resort town, plus what I was planning to play around with in the garden next year. At GCC2313 asked, quote, what do you think about the biocompostable mulch, which is essentially similar to black plastic mulch, but made from biocompostable materials as a way to reduce plastic use? I live in a cool, wet climate and have learned that for the heat-loving crops, I truly need all the help I can. End quote. So we've never used those biodegradable plastic mulches on our farm, and I guess partially that's because we've been certified organic up until about a year ago, and there weren't and still aren't any organically approved sort of plastic biodegradable mulches like that. Certified Naturally Grown does allow for some limited use of biodegradable plastic mulches. I don't have any super strong feelings about these. They contain some petroleum products, but each one is made a little different, so it's hard to make a sort of blanket statement there. I don't want to suggest that growers should or shouldn't rely on the types of mulches, and I think economically they are not always super easy to justify, but also sometimes the locally available mulches in an area are not exactly all that much better, sprayed hays and straws and such. So studies are not conclusive about how biodegradable plastic mulches affect soil health. It seems partially because the timelines of these studies are pretty short, a couple to a few seasons, and there are so many different products that break down in so many different ways on the market right now with different chemistry. So TBD on that, I guess. I'll keep watching it though and looking into it a little bit more for later segments because I do think it's interesting, and I would definitely like to understand a little better what happens when these things decompose. On Tuesday, we took a question about a potential urban farm startup using yards in Los Angeles, and I liked this edition from at MTLIANG. Just going to spell that one out. Who wrote, quote, urban farmer here, don't forget the constraints that insurance, zoning, and licensing might have on a business model with multiple yards. I had a tough time finding an insurance provider for my home-based urban farm and suspect it could be hard to find insurers that would cover multiple private properties. Residential zoning may restrict certain agricultural activities too. You might be able to farm a backyard, but not a front yard, for example. And in my jurisdiction, growing produce is exempt from having a city business license, but once I sell something with a sales tax, i.e. Merch, plant starts, that triggers the business license requirement. Sadly, there is a giant chasm between growing food as a hobby and growing food as a for-profit business. These are not insurmountable challenges, and it's good to know them up front so you can design the farm operations around any legal requirements. Fortunately, all the people I've spoken with in our economic development and planning departments have been super helpful. At the end of the day, most cities want small businesses and will find ways to help them succeed, end quote. And I like that. I like like that last little bit there. There's definitely a where there's a will, there's a way, but also people wanting to help. And I think that farms and gardens are of a lot more interest than they were, like 10 or 20 years ago. So hopefully they get more support from those urban communities and community boards and all those things. But just in general, urban farmers are going to have more pressure to work on their business and community side, more so than rural farmers who have a lot more flexibility and freedom to do kind of what they want on their property. Insurance, though, that is something I had not thought of. So that's very interesting stuff. On Wednesday, we discussed different manures, like even cat and dog manures, and if it was okay to compost them. And like I said, technically it is, but a few commenters added something like what at Stephen Abel 1232 did here, quote, dog and cat manure specifically can carry some nasty pathogens, so if you use them in compost, it seems important that you do hot composting to kill those pathogens. I would not risk it around food in my garden, as I do not monitor the compost heat. I just let it age until I'm ready to use it, end quote. And I agree with that. And like I suggested in that episode, you should proceed with absolute caution if you're going to use pet manures. And also, that goes for every manure. In fact, with things like E. coli and listeria and salmonella, among others, chicken and other livestock manures come with no uncertain risks themselves. Pigs in particular, because we share many pathogens with them. Just see the movie Contagion for info on that. They too have exceedingly risky manure. Although I think the USDA and etc. overdo it sometimes on how they treat these things, it is not without merit. Manures can contain human pathogens regardless of the animal. So just because you can use pet manures or any manures doesn't mean you can do it willy-nilly. No matter what manure you add to your compost, it should be taken seriously and composted properly, 100%. Also that day I talked about adding biochar to compost and mentioned you need to consider your carbon and nitrogen ratios. At SlapLapDog noted, quote, does biochar really interact in the carbon nitrogen composting process? If so, how is it a stable kind of carbon? I feel like you might be wrong about this one, end quote. And that's a great question. The answer is that it does interact. Biochar is mostly a stable carbon, meaning it won't decompose, like potentially for thousands of years. But it's said that something like 10 to 30% of biochar can be degraded in composting, depending on how it was made, from what, etc. So that means it can be added as a source of degradable carbon or added to the degradable carbon. And although it doesn't behave exactly the same as, say, straw or wood chips or whatever other carbon sources you're using, it will lock up some of the nitrogen and can prevent adequate heating in the thermophilic stage, the hot stage, if added at too high of a dose. Effectively, you will still need biodegradable carbons, but you would want to consider some of the biochar that you add as part of that degradable carbon source in your carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're using, say, chicken manure as the base manure, though, a little biochar can actually help retain some of that nitrogen that it so easily off-gasses, so that nitrogen doesn't get lost to the atmosphere, which is a cool trick. Good on you, biochar. Anyway, I'll repost the most helpful fact sheet I found about that stuff in the show notes today. Very interesting stuff. Then on Thursday, we talked about squash bugs and bean beetles at Oak Knob Farm. Wrote, quote, I planted my squash later than usual this year by about a month and had 0 vine borers. We're usually overrun, they say. I realize they are not the same as squash bugs, but anecdotally, this concept has worked for me for other squash pests, end quote. Thanks. And for serious, life cycles do matter with pests. It's like a buffet for pests. If they get there too late or too early and everything is gone and then they have nothing to eat, that's good for us. It's not as good for them. Great stuff overall this week, you all, as usual. Also, I want to say how much I love how supportive you all are of one another when someone sends in a video or a song or whatever. That's always so cool to see, but not at all surprising. Best comment section on the internet, as I always point out. All right, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk about working with the weeds, sorta. Be right back.
Hey, Jesse. This is Fall Prep here. Bill Price in North Idaho. Lots to grind up, a lot of browns. I do have old grass, so there's a question for you. Does old grass, when it's green, still have good nitrogen? Thank you.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmhand is the virtual assistant built for farmers, helping CSAs scale sales, run error-free fulfillment, and deliver 5-star service. Whether you're at 100 members or 1,000, Farmhand helps you grow without burning out. You've heard us and our farmers right here on Growers Daily. Explore farmer wins and learn more at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Is this work worth $2 per month to you? Maybe $5? Do you get $5 worth of value out of it? I hope so. That would be great. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always, as a bonus, get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Bill Price, who writes, quote, "How I learned to stop worrying and love the weeds." I love that you gave your comment here a title, Bill. That's great. Bill writes, "Hi, Jesse. I'm curious about your thoughts on making weeds useful. Here in northern Idaho, it is actually very dry. I don't think we've had appreciable rain in over 120 days. Feel that. The grass is dry and dormant, and that source of compost green is not available. On our ground, we do have lush growths of Canada thistle. I've battled it for a decade to no avail. Lately, however, I've let it grow tall and flower. Bees love it. And then I side it for composting before it sets seed. Its deep roots ensure it's always green, no water required, and it produces copious amounts of biomass. Obviously, this isn't a cropping area, but on a fence line and building borders, maybe it's something best to work around and with problems rather than consistently fighting them. Do you have other examples of useful weeds/pests? Thanks as always for your work here. Bill Price." End quote. All right, Bill, great fun question here. And I fully support using the green stuff around you, even if it is considered a weed for something like composting, mulching, or making biochar, etc. I wish I had a flail mower collector myself and a tractor so that I could, retain all of my grass clippings and my once a year, pasture mowing for compost production or potentially mulching. Now, as you point out, the weed seeds issue here is real, especially for something like Canadian thistle, which has been a subject of many farmer nightmares over the years. You would not want to collect those and have a single seed survive the composting process, but mowing just after the main flowers are set and the bees got to enjoy a few days of it, I think is a totally fine approach. Loads of nutrients and biomass there. Just make sure you don't miss a year. That would be the risk. And as you point out, it's drought resistant. As many of you will know, I use living pathways, which are sometimes specific plants with specific purposes like clovers, but are also just whatever nature puts in there because there's only so much you can do there. I keep those mowed with a small electric mower and collector, and then the material is then added to the compost, which eventually makes it back to the garden. I love that. It's a nice little symbiosis there. Livestock will take advantage of some of the weeds around your farm as well, especially goats, because all of the rich protein in them, especially when the weeds are young and lush. So that is an indirect use of them. If you add that to your compost pile, it's essentially turning those weeds into animal manures, then into compost to fertilize your gardens later. Green equals protein and protein equals nitrogen. So how can you turn that green, lush stuff around your farm into nitrogen for your garden? However you can do that is great. So long as you are not promoting any sort of weed issues in the garden, or at least risking them, then I'm all for utilizing your fence rows or around your barns or wherever they may be to collect some of that nitrogen. I also fully agree that oftentimes problems or challenges are opportunities. I love to think of the world that way. How can you turn that wet area where no crops will grow into useful space? Can it be a pond instead for toads and water and all those things? Or maybe it could be a pollinator habitat, a place to grow cress. How about the area that is overrun with bindweed? Can that be something other than a garden? Maybe it needs trees. Maybe it needs goats. Opportunity is the key word here, not looking at the negative aspects of a farm as well negative, but as untapped potential. That is, in fact, what it looks like to listen to your land, to listen to your soil. It is to ask it, what is this place giving me and what can I do with it? Anyway, what are some examples of that you all have experienced? Would love to hear them. Otherwise, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we will talk about composting in place. Be right back.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, so something that comes up from time to time is this idea of just adding raw materials to a garden bed and then covering that with some mulch or something and then allowing all that to break down for planting in the spring. Essentially composting in place, or rather, I guess in this case, not composting at all, but decomposting stuff on a garden bed to improve the fertility. Or the materials are buried in like a ditch or something, or a hole beneath the soil, and or mulch is applied. Is this a good idea? To start, someone might ask, Why would you do that instead of just composting it so that the bed is not taken out of production? Well, first, not everyone who has the space for a few garden beds also has the space for composting. Not everyone who is allowed by their community to start a garden is also allowed by their community to compost. And maybe not everyone who wants to garden wants to also cover crop or grow a winter crop. So perhaps that is an alternative option for using those beds over the winter, an enriching one, no less. All right, so back to the is it even a good idea question. Well, it can be, sure, but it depends a bit on what materials we are using. Let's say that you are wanting to take your old kale or tomato plants and bury them in the soil and cover them with mulch to help enrich those beds for next year. Well, in that situation, it can work if you're not planning on planting kale or tomatoes there the next year, because you would also probably be propagating some plant diseases. So that's a scenario I would say is not ideal. Okay, let's say you have a bunch of juicy watermelon scraps from making really awesome juices that you put in your freezer and you're going to enjoy all winter. Ideally, those would not be added directly to the soil just because it's so much juiciness, but could be added on top of and then underneath of some wood chips or straw or etc. How about raw manure? Well, we talked earlier this week about the regulations for raw manure, but so long as it is added 90 days before any crop is harvested that does not touch the ground, or 120 days before a crop that does touch the ground is harvested, then you're technically good to go. That said, its efficacy at enriching the soil will depend on what state the manure is in, what time of year you put it down, if it has adequate moisture to break down, and what the carbon to nitrogen ratio is. Horse manure, for instance, can be slow to break down without adequate moisture added because it is higher in carbon than other manures. Chicken manure can off-gas a lot of its nitrogen without adequate carbon added, so you want to make sure to add your carbon. So the state of the manure itself will make a big difference. And again, the value of composting is killing potential pathogens, so without that, time is the alternative pathogen management strategy. Now, these ideas can certainly result in healthy soil. I think there are situations and perhaps waste materials that may make sense for this, maybe even more sense than composting them. I don't know. One that I think of is local harvest farm up in Canada used to put down, and maybe still do, a bunch of wood chips and then cover that with chicken manure and allow that to decompose for planting the next year, which I think is a totally fine way of going about it. Of course, with food scraps and such, rodents could be an issue, but they can be an issue in composting too if it's not protected. Smell too if your materials are not adequately covered. You could also use a tarp or burlap or something similar to cover the bed, the material, and all the materials and help them decompose and protect them from weather, which may also help with birds and other stuff dragging stuff out of your beds. Composting is nice because it kills pathogens and some pests, and it's fast for larger material, not to mention it's relatively containable. But decomposing materials where you plan to plant, as long as the disease factors are mitigated for human pathogens and plant pathogens, then I don't inherently see any issues with it. If it makes sense for you and you were trying to balance your nitrogenous stuff with carbon and keeping it from stinking up the place, then I say it's fine. What say you all? Otherwise, that, friends, is our week. Poof, just like that. But before we go, we're going to take a quick word from our friends and frankly longtime supporters at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that and maybe get your end-of-the-year tax break over in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to Racing Louisville, Brighton FC, Lou City, FC Cincinnati, and all the other teams that will entertain me this weekend, like I guess my children's teams. But also, enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the band All We Have Is Now for their music. Also, speaking of music, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Skipping my coffee break. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of September, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, Chris Yates, and Ian at Grindstone Farms. So back to our class president, Amy. She is furious, outraged. How can this new kid, this new troll, no less, thinks she can just walk in here and take Amy's presidency. The next morning, Amy is out with her parents when she sees it, a sign, like a large sign near the school, Becca for class president, then another sign down the street, then flyers at the burger diner they go to for lunch. This is just absolutely out of control, Amy thinks. Her entire holiday break is spent fuming, coming up with a plan for when school gets back into session in January and how to deal with this new problem, this new challenge. Then, however, on the fateful Monday when she returns to school, she learns that Becca will not be coming back. Oh yeah, her friends tell Amy, didn't you know? Becca was an exchange student, just here for a few weeks. Amy suddenly slumps into herself, realizing her entire break had been spent fuming over something that wasn't even real, a challenge to her presidency in this case. So much energy and time and emotions wasted, and that, my friends, is the historically accurate story of where we get the term trolling, as told by Amy, class president, 5th grade. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We'll see you Monday for a new story about who knows what. Have a great weekend.